A couple of months ago, we did a cover at The Economist, and the cover was kind of the battle for digital supremacy, which was basically the battle for supremacy in AI, and it showed these two digitized giants. It was the US and China. And a lot of my European friends then called me and said, so what's happening? Where's Europe? Where's Europe here? Kind of, weren't we supposed to be kind of number two in technology? All of a sudden, we're not even on The Economist cover anymore. And so that's triggered in me the idea to go on a quest to look for Europe in AI in particular, and I'm still working on that. And so I was very excited when Steffi invited me to run this panel, because I hope it's going to help me to find Europe in AI. So the question is, which I kind of suggested, has Europe lost it in AI? Of course, that's a provocation, but I think it's a good starting point. That's the narrative you get outside of Europe. I was in Silicon Valley last week, and whoever you talk to, that is the prevailing opinion. So why don't we start with the first round on that? And why don't you start? Tell me, how would you answer that question?
I would say that Europe has not lost it in AI, and that we are at the beginning of what is obviously, and it was just said, a very transformative technology. However, I think that Europe still has inherent strength in the industrial sector. It was already spoken about how important data is. Europe sits on a lot of data that, with all due respect to the colleagues in Silicon Valley, they simply cannot have. Industrial data, be it from turbines or jet engines or what have you. And I think that we in Europe need to really think very carefully about where can be our competitive edge in this field. So I get exposed to this as well, some breathless account about China and how China is going to spend $150 billion on AI, and the Americans and this and that. It's not helpful. We in Europe obviously need to feel sort of the encouragement to be fast, but we need to really think, where can we make a difference? And here I would say that in the B2C, will be very difficult for obvious reasons, but in the B2B, I think we're still playing. So IoT, the Industry 4.0, it's not all over. And I think we need to prioritize now. We need to think about where we can make a difference. Let me also say, and this wasn't just mentioned, but there is speculation that as we go and proceed in AI, that there will be also the possibility for small data AI, which I think would very much suit the Europeans, and where investment now, targeted investment in research and development can make a real difference. So has Europe lost it? No, but I do encourage a speed and political prioritization of this field.
Thanks, and Jörg, same question to you, and also, I mean, has Daimler lost it in AI? I mean, that's an unfair question, but and no. You probably have to say no. But
for sure we
tell me kind of how you see it on the European or even German level. And,
we are a company. Traditionally, everybody complains about the German car industry as having lost everything in the last 30 years, slept over everything, and unfortunately, we're still number one in the premium car market. So something there is a dysfunctionality. No, we are not in a European enterprise any longer for a long time. And what is for us important is that we go to spaces and places where the people are who are forward thinkers. So we have set up the RD hubs in the last years in Seattle, for example, where we're looking for autonomous driving solutions. We went to Tel Aviv for cybersecurity. That's the next hub we set up. We are a long-time RD hub in China with hundreds of people, and in India. And we are now, I think, for more than 20 years in Sunnyvale. So I think we are still part of the forward-moving AI society, in brackets. And I think we have not lost anything for our company. And I feel quite confident that we'll stay in the stream and at the forefront of what is coming. One example, we have set up in Germany a plant that is called Plant 56, where we have this self-learning robots going on. It's now our newest and most intelligent plant. and we are learning from it for all the other plants we have around the world. And the largest plant we have is already in China. So we are moving to other spaces and places.
So does that mean, well, we actually don't care what happens in Europe? I mean, but
I
give me an idea.
I wouldn't say we don't care at all. We still feel at home in Stuttgart. But we are a global company and we can't stay still, by no means.
Okay. Paul, same question to you. I mean, you talk to a lot of people. Give us compare and contrast.
In of our business, we do more business in Europe than we do in North America.
Yeah.
So we have a kind of a broad lens on all this and did a lot of research for the book as well. I think it's probably the wrong question to be asking, but I'd say the answer, and I'll explain why, but I think the answer would be not yet. But there's focus and speed is the issue. Where you want to focus and how fast can Europe move? If you look at Europe, the strengths are very strong research and university ecosystem in particular. Look at DFKI in Germany. Look at the Turing Institute in Cambridge and other places in the UK. You could go on with France and other markets. Great R&D. I think very promising national agendas. Ram ended with Macron and the AI for Humanity plan of Macron is a good plan. Germany Industry 4.0 is a good plan. The UK's recent plan is a good plan. It's a national alignment. And there's industrial strength, which I think Anne was pointing to earlier. But those are the strengths. The challenges for Europe are platforms. The platforms are currently in the US and China, and the platforms in China will be strong and will be globally relevant, and in some cases globally dominant, in my view. It'll be very difficult for European companies to compete on the platform level, but I'm not sure that matters. I'm not sure that's the right question. The second challenge Europe has is a data issue on the big data front, which I think impacts consumer markets, but there is a lot of promise with small data AI and ability for Europe to exploit its data in the right way, but I think it's going to require very careful navigation of privacy laws and the like, and thinking about data policies that encourage entrepreneurs to take the right chances. And then the third issue I think that I see in Europe is if you look at venture capital inflows to AI as an example, there was roughly 15 billion invested in AI startups last year. 48% of that went to China, 38% of it went to North America, 14% of it went to the rest of the world, including Europe. So the capital is going elsewhere. If you look at corporate investment in AI that went into it, it would be a little bit reversed with Europe still in third place. About half went to North America, it went to US, about 25% to China, and then a smaller share to the rest of the world. So Europe isn't investing enough and attracting enough investment. I think there's a last mile issue of connecting the great research, the national policy, the will to do it, with the last mile to make it happen. And I think that's what we need to really crack in Europe. I think the potential's there, and I think the game is far from over, but it's focusing on that last mile that I think is key.
Let me continue to be a bit contrarian here. Yes, Europe has its strengths, but are we kidding ourselves? Data, for example. Yes, we have industrial data, but the data is very fragmented. The data has not been collected for AI. So the question is actually whether we can use that data. Data quality is a big issue. Other ingredient for AI, compute. All the big cloud computing providers are not in Europe. They're either Chinese. And if you look at the next step, compute specialized AI chips. Okay, we have GraphCore, but in the UK company, pretty good company. But otherwise, it's Silicon Valley. China is making a huge effort in semiconductors. Talent. Of course, we have lots of talent in Europe, but where does it work? Somebody told me, I think, somebody from DFKI, one of the promising scientists left for China. She got 6 times the salary she got. I'm sometimes talking to people in Europe about AI. Yes, it's not that clear. Europe hasn't lost it yet, of course. But it seems to me that it hasn't really hit home what's about to happen. And I think that the sense of urgency isn't there.
I bemoaned that as well in a moment ago, that we need a greater sense of urgency. However, from a public policy perspective, you cannot just sit back and say, look, it's better everywhere else, and Europe, we just cannot do that. We recognize the challenge, but I think we're ready to play. What you just discussed, Paul, the lack of commercialization from research into the company. companies is a well-known phenomenon that we're going to try to tackle with the new research program. So there is lots that can be done, and I think rather than being so depressed about where we are, I would say that the fact that we are not the first means that others are going to be making a lot of mistakes, and I would argue that already they have made a lot of mistakes, which has cost them dearly in terms of trust and confidence. And this is an opportunity for the Europeans, if you ask me, because we may not always be known as the fastest or the most innovative, but our products, including yours, I mean, they really have more trust oftentimes. And I think this goes back to the point I made earlier about the competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage will be that we do things in a responsible manner. You speak about responsible AI, ethical AI. Who's not to say that that is the new green? You know, it may very well be. And then we can lead. So I think I have to, from a public policy perspective, not be so pessimistic. I have to look for the opportunities and also mention, by the way, that there are very dark sides to AI which have not been discussed here. The potential to completely abuse it for mass surveillance. The bias that you spoke about, that can really be, there's already a lot of bias in society, but there's the potential that that really gets exaggerated, you know, and that entire groups will be marginalized. There's the potential for autonomous lethal weapons. There's really, really dark sides to AI. And I think that Europe wants to be on the right side of this, wants to think before we do things. And this is something also that I would like to say to people who develop these technologies. You need to stress test your ideas. We've always been told about how great everything was going to be, but we sit here today with democracy seriously under strain. And really society and more divided than I have ever seen. So, you know, again, from a public policy perspective, I can't just think about the technology. I need to also think about the societal fallout, the jobs issues that you speak about. And here I would argue that maybe European society has also perhaps more resilience precisely because we are more inclusive societies. So it's not that easy. It's not only about technology and the latest startup and this and that. This is a lot more complex.
Paul,
No, but
sorry. Yeah.
I would totally disagree, because we have to be in line with the most modern things that are going to happen. I know that there is an ethical side, but we can't sit and wait for the next wave of technology to come. We have to be with it. Otherwise, we have no chance to keep our workforce in Germany, in Europe, in the world. And we have always to be one step ahead of the competitors.
Can I play devil's advocate? That's not the role of public policy. A lot of European companies have literally slept through digitalization. So, you know, I think there's also the blame to be looked at in the private sector. I know it's always so easy to look to Brussels or to look to Berlin or look wherever, but I really have to say I've been shocked and surprised sometimes about how slow companies have been to understand the seismic changes that are underway here, because that's frankly, I mean, that is your job.
Yeah, but we are not blaming Brussels.
But many others are, I tell you.
That's a change.
Many others are.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is, again, reframing the question, because, you know, a lot of the discussion that I hear around this question, has Europe lost it in AI, focuses on how do we create another Google or Tencent or something like that. I don't think that's the question.
Exactly.
If you look at those companies, that's 5% or something of global GDP. Why focus on that? Let's do what we can there. But the other 95% is where the real leadership opportunity is for every region, not just Europe. And what's happening with technology, what started with digitalization, is every company is a technology company. Every company is differentiating through how they apply AI and digital technology, and in picking the spots where you're going to lead. So why wouldn't European pharmaceutical companies becoming the world leaders in AI-enabled R&D to find new drugs faster, be the fastest to find new drugs and new molecular compound analysis on the global stage using deep learning? You know, that's a good one example of many. Same with Daimler, and, you know, leading in vehicles and autonomous transportation. And when we look at it that way, we actually did a piece of research related to the book where we did a macroeconomic research looking at Europe and the opportunity for value creation in the economies. We looked beyond Europe, it was the whole world essentially, but we looked at Europe as part of it. And what we found in most countries in Europe is the opportunity by 2035, as this plays out, to potentially double GDP growth in some countries. And what would mean, based on the analysis we did, in Germany it could add $1 trillion to GDP by 2035. In France, 500 billion. Even in Belgium, 90 billion added to the GDP of those countries. And it's not by creating tech companies, it's by applying AI to make the existing industries more competitive. And those are the machines coming, I think.
The robot.
The robot.
Self-learning robot.
And potentially increasing worker productivity in manufacturing and some of the key industrial sectors by up to 40%. And I think that's why I think we need to keep reframing the question, because can we create another Google in Europe? I'm not sure that's the question. The question is, how do we create industrial leadership enabled by AI in the sectors where Europe is the leader?
Yeah. So now the question is, what you just said is, of course, completely true. It's not just about Google. It's not just about consumer data and all that. But tell me, how can Europe, or how can Germany do that? I mean, there's big debates in Berlin now about kind of a national AI strategy. Same thing is happening in Europe. I mean, what do you expect from these kind of talks? And in an ideal world, what would be the list of measures? And let's kind of talk, because it structures the debate. Let's take the main ingredients of AI: data, compute, talent.
Yeah,
Walk me through your kind
I have my list.
Do me a slide.
I think there's 4 things that first of all, it's a public-private cooperation that we need, but I think there's 4 things that governments need to do to stimulate AI. The first is having national-level R&D agendas, because you can't rely just on universities and companies to do it themselves. And somebody made the point earlier of what does Europe stand for, what does it mean? You need national, bold ambition around transformational objectives with AI, I believe. So it needs to be a national agenda. I think Macron did a nice job of that in France with what he did with AI. And it needs to be supported by real material investment dollars. I think the 1.5 billion euros in France was really just the start of what countries will need. So that's the first thing you need, and that needs to be aligned and shared across corporations and universities. The second thing you need is a data policy, and we do need better data policies to enable companies and entrepreneurs to develop solutions. It's anonymized data, thinking about the data that in your country or in your region is going to provide competitive advantage. How do you not just block it down and hide it, but how do you enable it to people to create new competitive advantage? That's different than the way a lot of people are thinking. The third thing you need is responsible AI code. I think Europe does have an opportunity to lead around trust and responsible AI. It's going to matter to people the more we have issues like we talked about in the cyber discussion earlier, and it's a bigger issue on the B2B front than it is on the B2C front even. So I think the responsible AI and serious work on real policy, not regulation necessarily, but real policy on responsible AI is important. And the fourth thing on my wish list is real investment and real new creative thought on reskilling and lifelong learning for the workforces in the countries. So I think those are the 4 agenda items I'd put out there.
I wanted to add one, which is adoption and diffusion of the technology, which is oftentimes overlooked. We already start many policy discussions before firms are even using it. We're seeing it, if you look at AI, we know that only about 25% of large companies in Europe use big data and 10% of SMEs. So by definition, at least with the current state of play with AI, this is essentially your pool of companies that's going to be doing AI. It's not enough. So we need to also think about how do we incentivize the pickup of the technology? How do we get firms to understand this is transformational and they need to be a part of it? That if machines can learn, a place like Germany that prides itself on its industrial base needs to be at the forefront. I mean, that is very clear. So adoption and diffusion of the technology, I would also add as a priority.
Cool.
Can I throw in one other item that
Sure.
I'd put on that we've talked about a little bit in some other audiences? I think that we need to consider economic and tax incentives too. Right now, at least I can speak more of the U.S. that I know better, but I get more return on my business results through GAAP accounting and tax, the way the tax law works, to buy a piece of machinery than to invest in retraining an employee. And so when it comes to meeting short-term earnings pressure, what do? You invest in capital and depreciation, and you de-emphasize or you push off your investments in human capital. The single best thing any of us can do for AI is investing in people, and investing in the people and the training of people, both the AI experts and the rest of the workforce. And our current economic incentives, our current accounting standards, and our current tax policy incents the wrong behavior rather than the right behavior.
Jörg, what's your wish list?
Sometimes you need PR stunts in order to convince lawmakers that the future is not bad. We, for example, in 2016 put the Prime Minister of Baden-Württemberg into a self-driving truck together with our board member. We streamed it live on video. It was on a normal highway. It was not a closed circus. And it worked tremendously well, although the people were totally controversial in their heads, our member of the board and the Green Prime Minister. But it worked pretty well.
Was he afraid?
He was not afraid, no, nobody. There were two of them not. Maybe our one was more afraid than the other one. But anyway, it worked. So you could see that there is a possibility of driving with less accidents, autonomously, and even more efficient for the surroundings. So you have to make people see what they can get, on the one hand, and you have to be aware of the dark spots that are in it. So, and you have to make it public.
But I mean, again, from Daimler's perspective, what is your wish list? What do you want from Berlin and then later from Brussels? What should be on the AI agenda of these institutions?
At least an open-mindedness, that we can talk about everything, and that they move maybe faster than in the past, and are more open for developments that are there. And that is a bit difficult in a parliament, I understand that, but we have to be much faster than in the past, as a company, as a public, and as lawmakers.
Paul, you mentioned as one thing to do is the kind of data regulation, data policy, creating a data economy. Kind of, can you delve a little bit more deeply into that? What does that mean in the European context? Is that, because I see that the main disadvantage seems to me that Europe has is kind of scale. I mean, in China is even bigger than the US, kind of, so they have a single market, they have centralizing forces, they have either big centralized companies or the government is imposing standardization in data. All of that Europe doesn't have. So how can we kind of simulate that type of a kind of a single market? Because institutionally we won't get there.
Yeah, I think I don't have the full answer for it, but I think the more cooperation, it's kind of multi-company cooperation, and then government-sponsored cooperation to create the data sets that can be used to inspire new businesses and new business models. Some of that's happening on the cyber front right now, so it's an encouraging model to use where you're sharing threat information and such to everybody's advantage. Extend that to manufacturing, to automotive, industrial, to other areas where the entrepreneurs don't just have, as you look at creating these digital ecosystems and create a virtuous circle of investment in new companies, you have other advantages in addition to just being able to get investment and getting some of the talent. You have data that's available. That's why a lot of companies start up in the US, and why companies, even Western entrepreneurs in some cases, are going to China to get access to data to use to scale and train their AI algorithms faster. I think Europe needs a coordinated response to that. That's going to be difficult and controversial and hard, but I think that's going to be a barrier to some business models if it's not in place.
And I mean, of course, Europe is pretty proud of GDPR. And is that, I mean, in the US, of course, in Silicon Valley, you get, again, the narrative that there's a tension between AI and GDPR. And kind of intuitively, that is.
I think GDPR is a good thing. I think we need something more approaching that in the US, not every detail of it. But I think it gives a good foundation. But that's why you need the right kind of cooperation and collaboration to get to then anonymized, available other forms of data that within a GDPR framework, respecting the privacy laws, which are good, it still allows the data to be available in ways that can stimulate companies and entrepreneurs to develop competitive services similar to what are coming up in other markets.
It looks a little bit like the situation of the markets have changed. When we went to China, we were forced to have cooperation with Chinese companies. We still are, in a way. It opens slightly, but we still are. Now, the European companies are looking more for cooperation with the Chinese because they see the power and the skills the Chinese have with the IT companies, and they are coming really with force. And I think there is definitely a need for cooperation, nothing else. Otherwise, we will be swept away from the market.
So one last question before I open it to questions from the audience. On talent, kind of that is an obvious problem, and it may be the most important one, given the importance of talent and data science in these, or scientists in these companies. what can Europe do there? Kind of, we certainly can't kind of multiply all the salaries by 5 or something. Are there other ways of keeping good talent here?
Yes, this is an issue that's been on the policy agenda for a long time. It's a well-recognized challenge. I think we're getting a little bit better. I mean, it was just said we have some talent here. We have. I would argue that that we're getting more ambitious, but it's still too slow. However, what has benefited us already is that there are less incentives to go elsewhere. I think that people are less inclined to cross the Atlantic. I think people are less inclined, perhaps, to cross the Channel, and that can be an opportunity for Europe. I think that if you look at people who are highly skilled, who have some of these skills, they would very much identify with European values, with our way of life. These are not just data managers, they also lead private lives. I think that they would very much like to live here if we can make it more attractive and also really demonstrate to them that maybe, I mean, Europe sometimes has an image that it's too complex and you need to learn the local language. I mean, there are some countries that have really done a good job of attracting international talent. It's obviously the area around Stockholm. Lisbon has put itself on the map more recently, but also Berlin, Munich. I mean, there are many hubs in Europe that are doing well, but I think our job at the European level is to help scale that all up. And then I think Europe has, I'm sorry to say, everything going for it, because if people have the choice, they would still like to be in a place that's a democracy, where you have freedom and where sort of basic rights are respected and where you can live in a tolerant environment and, by the way, enjoy the best quality of life.
I think there's an opportunistic view there for Europe as well that I don't think is being played right. I think there's kind of a brand and image issue with a lot of companies. I think the way to attract the best AI talent is through mission and data. You're always going to lose salary battle on some people, but what you need to convince the best AI researchers of is, I've got a great mission, you can change the world, and I've got the data to help you do that. Why wouldn't the pharmaceutical companies in Europe be the best place for the top AI researchers in the world? Why wouldn't Daimler be the best place for the automotive, AI experts, et cetera, et cetera? I think we spend a lot of time with companies kind of working on that. How do you, just like if you're a pharmaceutical company, you're trying to attract now the top pathologists and doctors and such. You need to shift that focus and market yourself and your brand as the best place to be for AI. And I think that's an imperative for companies that need AI, which is every company, to be able to position themselves in that way. You're always going to lose the salary battle on some people, but you need to attract people with mission and data.
Can I add to that? At the DLD in Munich, I remember it was the CEO of Deutsche Telekom who said that people love to move to Bonn and work for Deutsche Telekom. This is what he said, and you need to take it up with him, and that they're very happy there. And so my point is, we can make Europe more attractive. I think that really we have everything going for us in that regard.
Okay. Well, if I may add, obviously I had to move to Stuttgart to have a job there.
Okay.
Before that, I was in Essen. It was much better. Company was worse, but Essen was much better. But anyway, we are moving to places where we find talent. For example, of course we go to Berlin to find talent that is there. Of course we have our tech conference now in Stockholm. And of course we go into Tel Aviv to look for cybersecurity people. You have to go to places where you find talent. But you don't have to lose your heart and your core business. That I think forever we will stay in Stuttgart, but maybe it will be smaller in Stuttgart, globally perspective seen.
Okay, I think unfortunately the time is up. We started kind of with doom and gloom. We ended on a more positive note. I think that's a good mot de fin. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you very much to the audience.